The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Good evening, Ani. How's everybody doing? Good. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you. I'm getting us settled in.
Thank
here.
you. Appreciate it. So it's just a great honor and a great delight for me to be here with you tonight. I loved your memoir. And before we get started, would you mind giving our audience here a little glimpse of the memoir?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to just read the first chapter. Thank you. I don't believe in ghosts, but the campsite where we stood felt heavy with loss. I glanced between the trees, the branches swayed, and a breeze whispered across my cheek. I'd come to this remote island by boat with Jerry Shimanda, who'd been a member of the search party 28 years before. He stamped a steel-toe rubber boot into the dirt and dragged it. The pine needles parted to either side of his foot to expose the earth underneath. This is what he wanted to show me, a drag mark made by the impression of a body. We were in a vast wilderness north of Toronto called Algonquin Park. The brown needles of evergreens lay thick at that time of year. They crunched underfoot. It was early fall, and soon the reds, oranges, and yellows would bloom into a riot of color. Not yet, though. Before the leaves turned mid-September, there were still hints of a softer season in the land. Sunlight dabbled through the trees, water lapped at the thin strip of beach, and the scent of pine hung heavy in the air. Above us, a raven caught a plume and dipped a wing to slice through the sky. Terror had ripped through this beautiful place. Jerry put a hand on his chest and shivered. It happened in 1991, but at that moment, the memory came forward to join us. "You okay?" I asked. "It's kind of like the blood moves," he said, describing the surge in his chest. He took a deep breath. Jerry is fit, lithe, in his 50s, and spry, a body in constant motion. We had only met an hour before, but it felt like longer. He told me about the 5 winter months he had lived in a cabin in Algonquin Park with 4 dogs, without a furnace or running water, which he spent chopping firewood endlessly. I could think of nothing better. We had both spent a lot of time in the park, and a friendship can be forged by a place. Algonquin Park is nearly 3,000 square miles, a forest with more than 2,400 lakes and rivers and streams running through it. The borders of the park ring an area the size of Cyprus or Puerto Rico, or about half of New Jersey. We stood in the middle of the south arm of a large lake called Opeongo. Jerry had brought me here by boat to tell his part of the story. A couple from Toronto went on a camping trip for a long weekend. When they didn't show up for work on the Tuesday, their family and friends called the park office. By the time the search party found them, the couple had been missing for 5 days. When Jerry pulled up to the campsite in 1991, it looked like the couple had just arrived. There were paper bags of groceries left in the boat. The Coleman stove had been lit and gone cold. A tent was set up. There were 2 camping chairs by the ring of rocks that marked the fire, 1 chair knocked over, 1 still upright. A styrofoam tray of ground beef sat by the fire. It was untouched except for a tiny prick in the plastic, like a raven had picked at it or something, said Jerry. The search party climbed out of the boats and spread out to do a hasty search, a quick look around for any sign of life. They talked quietly amongst themselves as they did. None of them knew what to make of what they saw. They speculated about things like suicide, double suicide, or murder and suicide. All guesses were far more statistically likely than the reality. This was a crime scene of a different kind. One of the searchers wondered aloud if the couple had been hurt. If either or both of them had tried to make it back by land, they would have crossed the water via a short channel. From there, they might have had to climb a hill. But even if disoriented or lost, they would sooner or later run into a road. With hindsight, Jerry said, it didn't make sense. That would be a day or two. They would have been found already. Jerry showed me where he'd opened the flap of the tent. He remembered a thin, inflatable camping mattress inside with a dusty paw print on it. He didn't think much of it at the time. With food left around and no people at the site, animals were bound to come through. The sleeping bags were still wrapped up in plastic garbage bags. It looked like the couple hadn't even spent the night. We walked up the slight slope towards the back of the campsite. The land climbs towards a ridge that runs the length of the island like a backbone. There in the underbrush, it's thicker with balsams, small spruce, and shrubs. It provides cover. If I crouched down, it would be difficult for someone standing by the campfire to see me. Jerry pointed to where the bodies were found. My dad was a butcher, he said, explaining why he went to look at them. His fingers didn't touch me, but he mimed the action of a slice on my shoulder. The flesh peeled off the bone. You could see the shoulder, a fully intact hand, he said. I had only told Jerry part of my story. He didn't know that he was tracing a large scar, still raw from a deep cut made 10 months earlier. I had 3 other scars, one at the side of my ribs, another at the small of my back, and a short gash at the base of my neck. The wounds were healed, but still sensitive to heat and cold and touch. I tried not to flinch. When the men in the search party found the drag marks, they knew something had gone terribly wrong. Staying close, they walked level with each other in a line to follow the marks up the slope to the back of the campsite. Jerry and I retraced their steps. At first, the trees were spread wide apart, and it was easy to walk between them. Mixed in between the sturdy pines were a few birch trees with silvery bark that had peeled back. The dirt was packed tight around the base of the trees. Their roots wove through the ground like veins under skin. A gentle breeze pushed the canopy back and forth, like breathing. The men had kept moving in a line towards the denser brush at the back of the campsite. An officer with the Ontario Provincial Police, Steve Swerjeski, heard a sound. He told everyone to stay still. They listened. They heard a huff, a kind of cough. There was something on the island with them. It took cover in the bush. It was watching, and it knew they were approaching. The huff was a warning. They shouldn't come any closer. So then, Jerry pointed up to where the sound came from, his hand touching his chest again. We said, bear.
Thank you for that, Claire. So, a hugely compelling opening to a memoir unlike any that I've ever read before. And in this book, you very profoundly braid 3 stories together. The story of this couple from Toronto who fall victim to this bear, your journey with cancer, and the story of the bear itself. Mm-hmm. What prompted you to take this approach to writing your life story?
So I think, I'm sure you've had this experience too, that when you're alone behind your computer day after day as a writer, you don't have any connection or think about what shelf your book is going to end up on in the bookstore. Oh, that would be more practical, but I didn't think of that at all with this book. I guess for all my life, you know, I heard about this story, and I've seen many bears in the wild, and I always had this sense of confidence that if I saw a bear, I knew what to do. And I had a sort of secret background thought that was if I was attacked by a bear, I'd be okay. I knew the difference between grizzlies and black bears. I knew it was extremely rare, and that was very unlikely to happen. But it was to the point where, you know, if I was camping with my husband, I'd be like, you know, if a bear comes, don't worry, I got this. I got it. I was set. I had my bear spray and everything. But then I was diagnosed with cancer, and I all of a sudden felt more vulnerable than I ever had in my life. My physical strength was less, but also my mental strength. I didn't feel like I had this fortitude or this courage that I used to have. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that I wasn't so sure that I'd be okay. And And so I started out with that question, if I'm attacked by a bear, what's going to happen? And I guess I had this story of what happened in Algonquin Park in my mind. And in order to answer that question, I needed to use different techniques. So I needed to figure out why I was asking that question. I need to learn about the bear, and I needed to actually figure out not only what happened in Algonquin Park that night, but also why.
I remember this story. I grew up about an hour and a half from Algonquin Park, so it was big news in the Parry Sound area where I'm from. And bears have been present my entire life too. You know, I grew up on the res in the bush, and I've always thought I knew what to do with bears too when they were around. Not so, right? But when you are exploring, and we'll talk a little bit more about the bear a little later on, but when you had these three elements you were bringing together in this memoir, did you find yourself gravitating towards one of them more than the others, or was one more easier to write at times, or how did that unfold as you're undertaking the writing process?
So I think I thought I was doing an investigation, and then it became impossible because I remember one of my friends, she might be here tonight, but she read one of the early versions, and she turned to me and she said, "I loved it. Why are you so obsessed with bears?" And it didn't, and which is a question I still get. So I knew I was writing a memoir. I wasn't entirely comfortable with that, but I was comfortable doing an investigation. So that was really how it started, was I ended up in the office of a poor man named Jeremy Inglis, who I've since become very good friends with. He's a wildlife biologist, and he's worked in Algonquin Park around the time of this attack and since for the Ontario government. And he has dedicated his life to bears. And he actually didn't want to talk to me at first. He was very skeptical about why I was so fixated on a black bear attack when, there's really only one death per year in North America. It's statistically so unlikely. So he felt he wasn't sure about my intentions. And what he said to me is, "Are you going to turn this bear into a demon?" And it was a great question. And so what I knew by that point was that the couple did nothing wrong to bring this on themselves. So if I had an innocent couple who had done nothing wrong, and I write stories that are often full of conflict, then where did that put the bear? So that took me a few years, actually, to unfold that part. And then eventually the bear part came in to answer that.
And you say you saw this as an investigation. I remember when I read your novel, The Last Neanderthal, I thought, well, she must do a lot of research. Wow, this is very interesting. How did your research practice inform, I guess, the genesis of this? And is research like a way of life for you? Like, is it embedded into who you are as just a human being?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't even think of it as research. I think of it as things that I'm sort of obsessed with and I can't stop. I think it's more along, like I'm still reading every article about Neanderthals I think it's because it's not like I do a bunch of research and then I start writing either. It's an iterative process and it goes on and on. And it also, like, I think of one thing that really stood out when I was in the archives below Algonquin Park Welcome Center. Some of you, the visiting centers, some of you have probably been there. And underneath, down in the basement, there's this dusty room that has it has one computer, but it's not connected to the internet. Like it almost feels like you're stepping into another time and place. And there's all these binders. And in one of them, I found some articles about the attack. Someone had put them in plastic sleeves, and in there was a photo of the bear. And I'd never seen the bear, and it was really a moment that changed everything because he was lying on his side and he had first of all, his coat was very glossy. He looked very healthy. And to that point, I'd read all these sort of speculative theories that the bear had been starving or not doing well, and this was sort of a desperate act. But the bear I saw in this picture was very healthy and looked in his prime. He was lying on his side, and I just felt like I could put my hands on his coat and feel his life still. Like there would be heat in that body. It looked like he'd been, because he was shot after the attack. It looked like it was recent to me. And I could almost imagine what it would feel like to put my hands there. And the bear came alive in that moment. And I realized this is all about you. I've been trying to write a story about people, but this was a story about a bear making a decision. And he's the one that changed everything. So it's that kind of moment when you're doing research. You never know when that's going to happen, and it's not an organized process. You just sort of go and see what happens, and I love that. So I guess that's where that sort of makes my writing come alive, is the things I've come across.
And then on the other side of that, you mentioned speculation, and this is a memoir, but a third of it essentially is fiction. You take on the bear's life story in the year or so leading up to the attack, and from what I saw, you gave the bear agency, you gave it voice. In our culture, that's very important, in the Anishinaabe culture, to humanize or characterize animals. So in this fictionalized version of this bear's life, did you feel like that was your responsibility to not demonize it, as the park worker said?
I think I was concerned about that, but then something else happened where, I guess Jeremy Inglis, who I mentioned before, the wildlife biologist, he did start to work with me. I had gone a little soon after my operation to have my cancer removed on this research trip, and my poor husband Dave, who's here somewhere, he tucked me into the car, and I was going off to Algonquin Park to do this research. And I said, I turned to him just before I drove off, and I said, "Am I making a huge mistake?" And he said, "Probably, and I can't wait to see what you find out," and set me off. So then, like a day later, I end up in Jeremy Inglis's office, who had accepted my request for an interview. And then I started to tell him what I was doing. And I said, "Well, I have cancer, and I've been worried about a bear attack." So I realized that actually what's going to kill me has been inside me this whole time. And I hadn't really thought of that before, so I started crying. Yes, just weeping softly. So so there we were. So that's how Jeremy and I first bonded. But it was through that, okay, where am I going? Why I wrote so Jeremy then understood what I was trying to do, didn't want me to demonize the bear, but then I said, "Well, how can I get to know this bear?" And he said, "Oh, that's easy." And I was like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, you follow their stomach. A bear wakes up thinking about food. A bear's yearly cycle is all about food. They're very resourceful. They're very capable of feeding themselves. And how they do it is an art and a science put together, and it's a magical thing." And so that's what I did. I started following the bear's stomach and taking what I had observed and seen of bears and combining that with the scientific literature, I suppose. And then once I had that and saw the picture, that's where he came alive. It's interesting because what you're saying interests me so much, because it's almost like the opposite when you come from the sort of Western European school of thought. I feel like humanizing bears is often not done, and behaviorism is, you're not supposed to think that you can imagine the inner life of a bear. It's sort of a cold way, and you're supposed to go by observation and empirical facts. So I was going against that a bit.
Well, and I think that captures the essence of the relatability of the land and natural resources around us that you, I think, so beautifully captured in this story, and how your relationship didn't change, but you saw it in a different way with the land around you and the park system in general too. So there's several revelations throughout this story that I think you just so generously share with all of us, and specifically your cancer journey and what that process was like in the aftermath of your father's death. And there's a thread of grief almost that goes throughout this story, and it's both explicit and subtle. And you know, you grieve your health, you grieve your father, the bear as well, the couple that died. What was that an intentional exploration, or did those sort of sentiments arise naturally as you're writing the story and living through grief at the same time?
I think so. Part of the reason I was so vulnerable when I started writing this was that I've been an outdoor person my whole life, canoed extensively in not Algonquin Park, but also been in the mountains, and I'm a rock climber and all that sort of thing. And after my father died when I was young of skin cancer. It was melanoma to start. And I sort of went cold. I was too young to deal with it in some ways. I went numb. And the thing that helped me reconnect with life and with the world and people around me was the outdoors. So I went on an Outward Bound course when I was 14 years old, and it just ignited me, and I came alive again. So then when I was diagnosed myself with skin cancer at 45, what my surgeon said to me was, the cause of your disease is most likely genetic, but there's one thing that you can control, and that's exposure to the sun. And the ideal amount of sun for me, because I have this genetic mutation, is none. And it felt like the universe sort of playing a joke. I could barely believe it, because all I wanted to do was get in a canoe and go away. And so I guess I had to confront that, because I was trying to figure out how to be. If I couldn't go out in a canoe, in a reflective surface, an aluminum canoe and things, how could I be? How could I function? And so I think that's where confronting my father's death, and that he was 42 when he died, and I was 45 when I was diagnosed. So they felt very closely intertwined. And when I started this book, I couldn't imagine anything other than my father's fate being mine. So in a way, through this book, I sort of wrote myself a new story, quite literally, I suppose, imagination is a wonderful thing. It can give you space to be something new.
Do you think that helped you with that bear part, like more empathize with it, or sort of take on its perspective?
So that's I didn't do that on purpose. It just came. And I was wondering that, if I'd said my editor, who's also here tonight, okay, a third of this book is going to be the bear, and it'll be me, taking the perspective of bear. It'll be fine. Don't worry. I'm not sure how that. I'm glad I never said it out loud, because I might have lost courage. It's even now. It's. A friend was just telling me about another book where the writer did that with a grizzly, and as she was telling me, I thought, ooh, dude, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And it doesn't, but it was seeing that photo. And then I think there was a sense of longing too, of me being able to go across the land and move like a bear. I missed that so much that helped me take the leap. But it wasn't, I often write best when it's not deliberate, and I think that's where that came from. He just sort of came alive.
On the other side of that relationship with the bear is this couple from Toronto.
Yeah.
Ray and Carola?
Yeah.
Carola? Yeah. This attack happened 3.5 decades ago. And as you were investigating what happened to them, how was that relationship forming with these strangers to you that were long dead? How did that work out in your writing process? So
the book, actually, they are in it, but they're not. I think when there's a violent crime, there's and that's sort of out of the realm of what feels like something we can understand. There's often a lot of attention turned on the victims, and you probably remember this from the time, too. There was a lot of talk about if they'd handled their food properly or what they'd done wrong. And similarly, that kind of attention was put to the bear too. That and actually, the bear's head, after he was shot, it was cut off and it was sent for testing. And they were quite sure they were going to find parasites, or there was something off about the bear. But when I looked into it and did a few interviews, it became clear quite early on that the bear was very healthy in his prime and an extremely successful bear. Actually, he had a good amount of fat on him. He was doing well. And similarly, the couple had done nothing wrong. They did have food. The tray of ground beef that I mentioned in the outset was found at the campsite, but it was left untouched. The bear wasn't there for their groceries. And so many people go into Algonquin Park with food, and nothing like this happens. So, that was kind of where. So from there,
Well, you interview so many people to piece together what happened to them.
Yeah, so from there, I guess I don't want to say I didn't consider them, because I actually approached their families and made sure they were, because this is a memoir and it's sort of my story, but I wanted it to be about healing. I didn't want to upset them, and then raise friends to participated. So they're in the book, but I kind of sketched them in a way, because it wasn't their actions that caused this attack. It was really, and when I got the story working and understood it, was because I transferred my understanding to the bear. So it really was, and I don't think we always imagine animals to have, you said it very well at the beginning, that kind of efficacy and agency that this bear, when you look at the evidence, actually did. Yeah.
And what I appreciated about it so much is it read more like a natural, believable story, like something that I would be familiar with, having grown up in the bush, right, that I've heard from my family and ancestors and so on, right? And I think that focus on that relationship and the importance of that sort of mutual respect that we need to have with everything in the natural world around us is really resonant to me. So did you see that as some key messaging in the story, or did that just naturally emerge, do you think?
Yeah, I think in all directions. So respect for, in a way, writing the story was a respect for myself and my new condition. For a long time, I was trying to go back to pre-cancer Claire. And during the writing, I realized that wasn't who I was anymore, and I needed to become something new. But I also wanted every part of the story to feel alive and have life. And also because it's a story about healing and growing. Yeah.
Definitely. And then from a wider view, you also make a very astute observation about the park itself. We hear the story in North America, often from the settler perspective, about national parks, provincial parks, whatever, and how they're there to protect. But you raise the important question of protect for whom and from what. When you consider, who was removed from the land to create these parks, and also the resource extraction that goes on within the park system too. Do you think we need to more broadly have a more in-depth conversation about parks in this country?
Yeah. So this was one of the my biggest scoop. The thing that I was so surprised to learn during the course of researching this book is that 40% of Algonquin Park is logged. And some people probably know that. I didn't, after a lifetime of going to Algonquin Park. And when you include roads and gravel pits, it's actually about 60% is, extracted or covered. And it's just done away from the trails and the portages and things, so you don't see it. But I was shocked to find that out. And then the only shocking thing is that I was shocked, maybe because it's on the Algonquin Park website. It says it right there. I sleuthed that one out. So it actually, so it was just my idea that was stopping me from seeing that, right? My idea that Algonquin Park was pristine and conserved and protected by these borders. So those borders were drawn in 1893. And there was First Nation people who lived there at the time who the park was named after, Algonquins, who were ejected to and the reason given at the time was for the preservation of game. And so if we're preserving game, then the game, which, the bears, the moose, the wolves, live very much a free life until they encroach on humans in any way, shape, or form. And, the bear in this story took one step too close and was shot. So this is exactly as you said. I came to realize that a place like Algonquin Park, what I've always thought of this pristine wilderness, is actually a social construction. And when you think about a place like that, you have to ask, who is it protected for, and for what? And without those two questions, conservation isn't really a solid idea at all. So it changed the way I've looked at wild spaces across Canada and in the States too. I think they're under threat at the moment. And it in a way, for me, that was a great revelation because it started to chip away at the borders of what's wild. So I'm one of these people who always, look, I'm pointing up, goes north for the wilderness. Yeah, and it's like somewhere, so many Canadians live along the border, and we think of going north as going to the wild. But the idea of realizing that those borders are just lines on a map, if we start to expand them or question them, then the idea of the wilderness can open up, and we can start treating each other and the land with much more respect, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to open it up to questions from you all shortly. So I just have a few more questions for you, Claire. When I was invited to join you here tonight, I was really looking forward to it. I was very excited. I admire you greatly as a writer, and getting to know you as a person through your writing has been wonderful too. But also very selfish professional reasons for being excited to join you tonight. I'm predominantly a fiction writer too, and I've just signed a contract to write a memoir. So it's my opportunity to pick your brain about writing a memoir.
Yeah. That's exactly why I do these interviews too. It's like, I don't take writing courses, so I get to talk to Waub.
So when the prospect arose and you had to switch gears from fiction to memoir, what was that like for you?
So I was worried about it, I think, because I write fiction in order to be other people or to understand what it's like. I know what it's like to be me. And so I want to push as far as I can to inhabit another character. And I would have said that's why I write. That's certainly where the bear came from. And so then writing myself was very awkward at first, and it took a lot of drafts. But then I just found this. It was actually when I realized that this book was about how to be alive. That we're born and we're all going to die, and there's a bridge between those two things, and that's the people you love and your family and the things you fill your days with. And once I got that idea, then it became easy. Because I knew what I was writing then. So I took these beautiful moments from my family trips to Algonquin Park, or all the wilderness adventures we've been on and that sort of thing. And it was like, once I realized it's almost like a note for me, like a tone, a musical tone. That's my idea of music, apparently. Like it is a note, and when I can hear it, then I can write along it. And it was like, oh, this is a story about love. It's a love story.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I guess like when we approach fiction too, there are rules, sure, but a lot of us can just view them merely as guidelines, and we can do what we like within that arena. So my I think discomfort around the prospect of writing a memoir is like, I was born in 1979, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
But, you've brought in so many different interesting elements into what memoir can be. So as you were making these connections throughout the process, did it become really exciting for you?
Yes. Do you know you have a bit of a role in this? I don't think
really?
you do. I'm not sure if I've told you this. Okay, on the heyday of Twitter, 2016, I think. It might have been a bit later. Was it? I don't know. It's sort of a blur, but it's before Twitter was ruined, and we were both on it. And Wob used to
cesspool.
actually put his club sandwiches, which was like my favorite part of Twitter. As he was touring, was it one of your book tours or just your daily life? Anyway, he'd rate club sandwiches, right? Yeah, it was like the sandwich Twitter was a wonderful thing. But anyway, I came across, I was up north and hiking around, and I came across an old rock, which is an erratic. So they're around the Collingwood area and a lot of places where the glaciers used to be, a big boulder just there, and it's made of granite, and it's in an area with limestone. So how those got there is they were carried along by glaciers and melted out, and there they are since the Ice Age, and it's just amazing. And I posted it with a scientific definition of erratic. And then you just, you probably don't even remember this, you replied very quickly and you said, "Oh, I love bumping into old friends." And I was like, oh, like it was just this, it was such this beautiful moment, right? And so I feel like that it's like your life, but then you have all these inputs from people that give you different perspectives, and that make it so much richer.
Yeah, I remember that very clearly because in Waubgeshig, where I'm from, it's an island, and clearly there are remnants of these glaciers going by because just randomly in the bush there are these massive boulders, right? And in our culture we consider those ancestors, So yeah,
It's a
beautiful.
beautiful way to look at it, and it gave me a whole new. See, Twitter really was good for something.
Was good for a
wasn't it?
while,
I
yeah.
know. Oh well, it's gone now.
Billionaires got a hold of it, ruin
totally.
everything. Jeez.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was going to ask you something quickly. So, you're beginning this big publicity cycle with this memoir. You've done it before with fiction. Do you anticipate much different, or is it a little maybe nerve-wracking to be so candid out there with your life story? And I know you're just starting, but...
Yeah, no, and I had a few, like I did this, the melanoma, I can't remember their exact name, but they had me to do a speaking thing, and I thought it would be no problem. And then I got up on stage, and I was a wreck, and it was really embarrassing. I sort of lost. I thought I was quite good at doing little speaking doodahs. So it just. I was saying this to you before that I very consciously decided what to. You have a private life, and then you have a personal life, and I've put some of my personal life into the public. And I did that very deliberately and with care and I hope everyone who's in the book and in my life feels that way too. But it does, melanoma is the most deadly kind of skin cancer, and it's ongoing for me, and I've had it in my eye and on my leg. And so I live, and this book is about living with and coping with a certain level of fear. So it creeps. I had it in front of you. I don't know if you guys noticed, Wob kind of saved me there, but I had a bit of a brain stall. And I don't usually have that happen on stage. So it is raw. And I bet I'll have to have a big nap tomorrow.
Yeah. Take the day off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.